One man. Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. No, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Ladies and gentlemen, you have made it to the end of preview season here on the Three Technique, the college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and the Joes. My excitement getting the better of me. Trey, it is almost the end of talking season as we wrap up the ACC. We preview Notre Dame as well. That will be at the very end of the episode. You'll see why it makes the most sense to do it at the end of the episode. I think that'll become very obvious as we get into it. But a lot of really good football to talk about in this episode, Trey. The last episode, we talked about the dark horses, the midfield, the teams that you looked at, and there were some good pieces, but ultimately I think you ended up just going, I don't know, like eight wins, 9 wins would be a really good season, and finish 3rd through 7th in the conference. This episode, excuse me, if you finish outside the top 5 with maybe an exception or 2, it's probably a gigantic disappointment. And so as we set the stage for this, the teams that we're talking about in this episode, we're talking about Virginia Tech, we're talking about Clemson, we're talking about Louisville, SMU, and then Miami for the ACC portion. All of those teams have championship aspirations, maybe with the exception of Virginia Tech. And we can start with the Hokies. Like, where do you separate the hype and the reality with a very good head coach taking over in Blacksburg, optimism for the first time in a long time for Hokie Nation, and objectively a very talented but maybe unproven roster for Virginia Tech?
Yeah, I think you laid it out perfectly right there, right? Because you look at what Virginia Tech has been the last few years, just a once proud program finding itself in the dark ages, for lack of a better term, through the last few years here. The man that architected those dark ages is still on the sideline, or maybe in the booth this year as a defensive coordinator, which just is a very interesting development. But you bring in a guy like James Franklin, who has famously won pretty much every game he is supposed to in his career until his very last year at Penn State, and just really couldn't get over the hump. So it's two combating narratives, right? A program that knows they can be at the top of this conference, knows that they can be competing for national titles because they've done it in the not too distant past, but a coach that just hasn't quite found the way to get over that hump. So it's going to be very interesting, not just this year, but following the entire tenure of James Franklin at Virginia Tech, to see just exactly how this goes. I think it was a fantastic hire. I think it was the best possible hire that Virginia Tech could have made. It made sense for both parties, right? To get the fresh start for James Franklin, somewhere new, that's still very passionate about football and knows that they can win big. But also for Virginia Tech to shoot their shot at a guy that is in that big league of coaches that they feel like they should be dabbling in, right? So yeah. I think this is a great match. I think long-term it's a match made in heaven, but there's a lot of moving parts this year that I'm sure we'll get into here, and that could hold them back from being actual conference championship contenders this year.
Well, let's start with the roster, and I think it's probably easiest to start with the quarterback, Ethan Grunkemeyer, who comes in from Penn State. Obviously, a lot of Penn State players transferred down to Virginia Tech. They stole the Nittany Lions' entire recruiting class. It felt like everybody flipped on signing day. So, there's a Nittany Lion blue hue, I think, to the Hokies in year one. Where do you begin trying to figure out what the offense is going to look like, how stout the defense is going to be when, I mean, it's not quite as drastic as, an Iowa State or even a Penn State, I guess, but there's a lot of name tags and handshakes being handed out.
I think there's a positive is that a lot of guys know James Franklin and know that system, right? Either through being actually in Happy Valley or in the recruiting class and being recruited by James Franklin to Penn State. So starts with Ethan Grunkemeyer at the quarterback position. We saw him fill in after Drew Aller was hurt last year. He was in line to be the starter at Penn State this year if James Franklin was still there. But this is a guy that showed a lot of promise, I think, in a really difficult situation last year. He was thrown into the wolves kind of after a team and program had largely given up, and he rallied the troops and was good enough to lead them to a bowl game. So there's a lot of talent in there. He got some good experience last year, and now he's going to bring that to Virginia Tech, where week in, week out, he's facing a lower level of competition in the ACC than he was in the Big Ten, and he's getting to continue, like we said, have the continuity of guys like a Luke Reynolds at tight end to throw the ball to, right? Having guys up front that he's had blocking for him in practice, at least remotely. So I think on that side of the ball, I'm optimistic that they found enough pieces that can fit together. You look at a guy like Marcellus Hawkins; he's coming up from the FCS level to play big time ACC football. It's going to be a big step up, but it's going to be a big opportunity for him. He was very productive at, I think, Central Missouri State is where he came from, and then Keyshawn Brown coming over from Duke at the wide receiver position. Another guy that was really productive, 842 yards receiving last year. Lots of nice pieces to build around Grunkemeyer as he tries to find his footing in a new situation, but a similar feels like he's just kind of transported the situation. That might be easier than what some other guys are going through.
Mm-hmm. Ty Howey is the offensive coordinator. The defensive coordinator is a guy that just moved offices, right? Brent Pry is fired early on in the season, and then he's rehired by James Franklin to be the defensive coordinator. Feels very similar to the Ryan Walters mold that, we've talked about a lot on the show, where some guys are just destined to be really, really good coordinators, and that's fine, right? And chasing greener pastures ultimately just ends in disaster. Pry had cut his teeth and proven to be an excellent defensive coordinator. He's retooled the defensive line through the transfer portal. They don't have a ton of pass rush experience back. I think Kamari Copeland is their leading returner with 4.5 sacks from a season ago. So when you talk about kind of and I don't know if it's probably not strange now, but a unique situation where an old head coach, your most recent head coach, is now your defensive coordinator, who was your defensive coordinator before he was head coach. Like, how does Virginia Tech kind of sort through all of that and put together a more formidable product on the field this year? Because that defense was not good last year.
Yeah, I think it helps that, I think you're right that he's probably a guy that was much better as a coordinator. And we saw that because he worked under James Franklin. I think that's the thing that people forget too, is that he was James Franklin's defensive coordinator at Penn State. I think that helps the situation, quite honestly. Like, he's going back to his old boss. Could be a little awkward switching offices, of course, like you said, but I think going back to your old boss is going to help a lot with that. They have some nice pieces to work with. It's going to be a work in progress. And they, on the defensive side of the ball, the guys they pulled from Penn State, some experience, depth, but a lot of younger guys, right? Mm-hmm. that are maybe didn't play as much in Happy Valley. And a lot of the guys that they are going to be relying on potentially as starters this year coming up and coming from the G6 level. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of that comes together, right? You got some really interesting pieces, but so many moving parts that I think our listeners ranking them sixth, or are they fifth or sixth?
Fifth.
I think
fifth. No so respect for Jaden Daniels.
Even deeper. Yeah, no respect. I had to get that shot in there at some point this week. But I think it's very optimistic. I think that's maybe like a ceiling play for Virginia Tech for me. Just so many moving parts. And I think long term, like I said off the top, this is a awesome relationship. I think it's going to be extremely mutually beneficial for James Franklin restoring his legacy and Virginia Tech getting back to where they should be towards the top of the ACC. But this year, it feels like there just might be a few too many moving parts to get me really excited about them competing for a championship.
Yeah, well, with that, I mean, that was the next question. I think that's the biggest question that most people have about the Hokies when they're looking at the schedule, looking at the roster. What should you be expecting? Should this be a team that can contend for an ACC title, or is a bowl game more of a successful season? Maybe walk through the schedule as you kind of put guardrails on that.
It's a tricky, I think it's a sneaky tricky schedule, right? Because you've got VMI to open. That's obviously going to be a win. Then you have an Old Dominion team coming into Blacksburg who is potentially the favorite in the Sun Belt East. Beat the snot out of you the last time that you guys played under a different regime, of course, but definitely not scared to come into Blacksburg and take on Virginia Tech. And then you have back-to-back road games at Maryland and at Boston College. I'm not as worried about Boston College as I am about Maryland. I think there's a lot of talent on that Terrapins team, and getting them, in College Park is going to be very interesting. So just several landmines right off the bat that I think they should win, right? But just a little trickier for a first-year head coach than maybe you'd want. Then it's Pitt at home. We talked about Pitt on the last episode, and they're really good at the beginning of the year. So if you want to get them, you want to get them late. And then going all the way across the country to go to Cal for the first half of the schedule. So are they probably the better team talent-wise than every team on that schedule for the first half? I would say so. I think top to bottom, they probably have more talent than every team that I just mentioned. But can James Franklin still win those games he's supposed to talent-wise at a completely new stop? That's just going to be a big unknown. Then you go into the back half, and it's Georgia Tech at home, at Clemson, at SMU, Stanford at home, at Miami, and then Virginia at home for the Commonwealth Cup. That's a tricky close. And getting to probably the top two teams in the league in SMU and Miami, both on the road. So I think you could have a nice start, but it could be a little bit of a Pitt situation where it's a really solid start and you see just the schedule catch up to them down the stretch.
Well, that's where I netted out with Virginia Tech. So I was, a little surprised to see them ranked 5th in the ACC. I think, quite honestly, that speaks more to the ACC, the situation that the conference finds itself in, than Virginia Tech. But it's easy also to be hopeful where you've got so much new talent, and, new beginnings, new teams aren't always a negative. And I think for the folks in Virginia Tech, anything new, anything that was a change from what's gone on under Brent Pry as the head coach was going to be a positive. So I certainly understand the optimism. I'm rooting for the Hokies. I would love to see Enter Sandman get the broadcast started and that game actually means something, right? That's what I'm rooting for as a college football fan. I am very much on the bus that says Virginia Tech has a really nice start to the season. There's some guys that we tab as, the future of the program for the next year or two. And then the contenders, the real contenders of the schedule win those games down the stretch. For me, going to a bowl game, going 7-5, fantastic year one. Let James Franklin get his guys in the program and let him build this up the way that he's built up Vanderbilt and now, and then most recently, obviously Penn State. It's going to succeed. They've got the financial backing behind them. As soon as Franklin gets in the office, just massive donations pouring into the football program. So it feels like the athletic department, the football staff, the donors, everybody's aligned. I'm not betting against that train coming down the tracks. I do think year one, let's take the positives with the losses that will inevitably come. And, I think 7-5 is probably where I net out and would say that's a really good first year.
Yeah, no complaints from me on that. I think 7-5, 8-4 is about where I have them, depending on if they can pull an upset down the stretch. And I think that's a fantastic year one to build off of.
Yeah. All right, number 4, the Clemson Tigers, maybe the most polarizing team in this entire ranking. Trey,
they're only this high because Moose ranked them number 1. I just want everybody to know that.
Well, so I was going to say,
I'm just kidding. It evened out. I think this is about where it would be regardless.
What do you make of the Clemson Tigers, man? Like, you talk to some people, it's Dabo's revenge tour starts now. You talk to others, he needs to go, get a job in TV or in the pulpit somewhere. So, like, where is Clemson in your mind?
Well, in our ACC preview article on our Substack, shameless plug, 3techpod.substack.com for free articles. My third key storyline is what box do we put Clemson in at this point? Because this time last year, I think we spent maybe 5 minutes.
We don't need to talk about this time
Clemson.
last year. We don't need to talk about this time last year.
Well, I mean, I was on that train too, so I'll eat some crow.
Yeah.
The whole college football universe was saying how, everything's lining up for Clemson. I was looking at our preview videos from last year, and I think our title was something along the lines of like, they have what it takes to win it all or something like that. I was not pushing back against you. I was yes and amening everything that you said, but they've obviously lost the benefit of the doubt. I think that much is clear. They are also a program that is one season removed from an ACC title and playoff appearance. Yeah. You can't just throw that out. So they're going to be one of the most talented teams in the conference. They're maddeningly stubborn. Their head coach is maddeningly stubborn to his way of doing things. That includes 2 good old boy coordinators in Chad Morris and Tom Allen. And dipping into the portal a little bit more, but still only getting 11 guys, 12 if you count the one that was tampered with from Ole Miss, but 11 guys that they landed. Just a maddening situation. I think if you're a Clemson observer or a Clemson fan, I think both of those groups of people just have to feel like no idea what box to put Clemson in at this point.
Well, so I have so many questions about this team. I think first, let's start with the offense like we've been doing. Christopher Vezina is supposed to be the next QB1, right? Cade Klubnik out with the Jets. God help him and whatever he accomplishes at a pro career in New York with the Jets. Chris Denson is the backup quarterback who, depending on where you read, he's pushed Vezina, but I think Christopher being, familiar with the program, longer in the program, is expected to win and be QB1. You mentioned Chad Morris comes back for another stint at Clemson. I think a lot of us outside of Clemson, South Carolina went, what?
Really?
The guy that couldn't win in Arkansas? The guy that crashed Allen High School at the end of his tenure? Like that guy? But he did have success in his first trip around the sun at Clemson. So, it did not work. The Kendall Briles experiment did not work. Kendall Briles. Not Kendall Briles. Wrong brother. The Garrett Riley experience.
Garrett Riley. Yep.
Did not work. Clemson fans are screaming at me right now. Wrong sibling, kind of same level of ineffectiveness and turnover prone, I think. So new offensive coordinator, a lot of new pieces, but you did mention Gideon Davidson comes back at running back. They've got guys like Bryant Wesco Jr., TJ Moore back at wide receiver. My question to you there, is that a good thing? Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore have not really lived up to the 5-star status that they had coming into college. So is this going to be another instance of wish we dipped into the portal a little bit more, or is this their moment in your mind?
They are living by development and dying by development. And I think when we talk about the teams that I think are best positioned in the way to roster develop, you need to be a solid recruiter, I think, to be in the conversation every single year. I know that there's a few examples. Ole Miss has not done that. Lane Kiffin's going to try to not do that at LSU, it seems like. Indiana has obviously built through the portal the last couple of years, but I'll point to the fact that they got a couple of 2-year portal guys, quite a few 2-year portal guys that they retained, and that's what put them over the top for national championships. I digress there. But I think the combination of development and plucking from the portal to fill your holes is still what you want. I talked about that with Georgia when we were talking about our SEC preview a couple weeks ago. The reason Kirby Smart is still winning the SEC every year is because he's developing his talent and plucking needs from the portal. Dabo is not really doing either. He's not developing these elite guys like you mentioned. They're not finding their 4 and 5-star ceiling like you mentioned. Maybe they will this year. Maybe they'll take the next step, but we just haven't seen that yet on the field to be like the game breakers that they were recruited to be. And you're adding on top of that, not backfilling those positions. I'm sure Christopher Vezina, back to him for a second, is a fine kid. I'm sure that he is an upstanding citizen and a great representative of Clemson University, but you are Clemson and you can go out and get whomever you would like from the transfer portal at any position, not just the quarterback position. So like, it's not a lack of a passionate fan base. It's not a lack of NIL funding, to my knowledge, that is keeping them from doing this. It's straight up stubbornness from the head man, and it may work out for him. It may work out where they sneak into the ACC title game like they did a couple of years ago and win that game and sneak into the playoff. But the days of them being the team that is feared on the other sideline like they were in the late 2010s are completely over. Like they are not the feared team in this conference anymore, and that's not saying anything that Clemson fans are going to be surprised to hear.
Well, and I think that can be the reality. I think they're also like not that far away from starting to return to that, right? Like all it would take
if they can develop.
Right. I would think all it would take is some real success, not fluking your way into an ACC championship game, but dominating some folks, right? Dominating South Carolina, take back the state. I think if they could do that, and I don't know, convince somebody nationally that they have a true portal strategy, that they know what they're trying to do when it comes to roster construction, I think those would go a long way. The only other note that I had on the offensive side, Chris Johnson Jr., electric running back, one of the fastest players in the country, transfers up from SMU. So that backfield should be really, really good. The problem was they just at times couldn't block for the running game last year. That'll be a big question of mine heading into this year as well. On the defensive side, it's a lot of new pieces. There are some familiar faces off the edge. Sammy Brown is obviously the 5-star linebacker who they recruited a couple years ago, has played since he was a true freshman. You've got some production there. But when it did come to heading to the portal, a lot of it was on the defensive side. So with Tom Allen back for another year after a regression at defense, a clear regression at defense last year, what direction is Clemson headed in 2026 here?
You got to hope that the arrow's pointing up, but I think that, you look at the guys that they brought in, Jeremiah Alexander from Alabama, right? A guy that was fine at Alabama as a rotational piece, but he's not, like, in my mind, a game breaker that's going to immediately elevate this defense. Elliott Washington from Penn State. Again, a guy that was a nice rotational piece for the Nittany Lions last year, but these are not the guys that you were fearing for Clemson 5, 6, 7 years ago. And you're not looking at that defense and going, yep, there's a surefire NFL first-round pick at every single level like you were a few years ago. And look, it's not that they're going to fall off the deep end and go full Mike Norvell, Florida State. I'm not saying that it's all hopeless from that standpoint, but it's just they're operating in a completely different tier in my mind than they were just a few years ago. And they really don't have anywhere to look but in the mirror for any reason why that's the case.
All right. Well, like you said, I think we're saying a lot of things that Clemson fans have already been saying, have taken to Twitter, the message boards. I don't think we're breaking any news, and I do not expect our comments to be overly filled with, mad Clemson fans.
Nuh-uh.
I think that's just I think that's just the realistic picture. But that being said, with all the questions that we have, there's a lot of talent on this team, and there is a path forward where it all clicks, right? So walk me through the schedule, but give it to me in the lens of, like, best case scenario. Like, how would things go right, and how could Clemson return to the ACC title game?
Look, if you're looking for optimism for Clemson this year, it comes from the schedule, because you open at LSU. That's a team that you were obviously a much different team than the one you played last year, but you were right there with them at home last year. It's Lane Kiffin's first game, all the pressure that's going to come with that in Baton Rouge, and they're going to still be trying to figure things out. So, hey, maybe your continuity wins out in that one. That's the best case scenario there. You get Georgia Southern and North Carolina at home after that, and then you go across the country to Cal. Tough road trip, but again, you're going to have the talent advantage in those games. You get Miami at home, after you've had an opportunity to build some continuity. And, if you're going to get Miami on the schedule, you want them to be at home. Even if you lose that one, that's just one conference game. After that, it's pretty manageable. It's Charleston Southern for the last non-conference game, Virginia Tech at home, at Florida State, at Syracuse, Georgia Tech at home, at Duke, before you host South Carolina in the Palmetto Bowl. So after that Miami game, if you can manage to keep that one close and respectable, if you can not stub your toe somewhere else, you have the talent advantage probably in every single other game still for who you have on your sideline. Can they get the most out of that talent? That's the question. But the ceiling of Clemson is still finding a way to get to Charlotte.
Yeah, I look at this schedule, man, and I'm obviously not picking Clemson to be a champion of anything this year. But boy, it's hard to not at least consider the fact that last year was just an anomaly and not part of a larger trend, a downward trend. And hey, man, like what if they find the pass rush, right? Like, Will Help last year was kind of a disappointment. What if he's really, really good this year? And Christopher Vizina gets the blocking up front, and Gideon Davidson stays healthy all year, and Chris Johnson Jr. is electric. Like, the wide receivers finally produce and don't drop passes. You can get your way, I think, to 10 wins. I think you can talk yourself into 10 wins, at least relatively easly without having to put on the orange and purple glasses. Yeah.
I think so. I like from a pure talent, out-talenting the other team standpoint. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think, you could certainly convince me if you lose to LSU, you lose to Miami, and then maybe you just find a way to beat out a bunch of, tricky road games at Cal, at Florida State, at Syracuse. You beat South Carolina. I don't think either of us are really all that high on South Carolina based off our SEC preview. So I don't know, man. Like, you could convince me that Clemson might be on the other sideline when it's all said and done in Charlotte. But yeah, very, very interesting to see what the internet's opinion is on Clemson as we put pen to paper here. I'll say officially Clemson goes 9-3. I think they lose those two games. They drop another one of those road games that we're just kind of scratching our head going, man, why'd you lose that one? But 9-3 after last year going 6-6 and then losing the bowl game, like that would feel like a breath of fresh air, like a return to we can sell this going into the next offseason to me.
Yeah, I think that's a fine expectation. Then go out and get a good game-breaking players in the portal and find a way to get to that next level. That's your goal next offseason, Dabo.
All right, well, let's move to number 3, the Louisville Cardinals. And I think where you look at different places, Louisville and SMU are going to be number 2 and number 3 in some order. The Jimmies and Joes just favoring SMU, so Louisville comes in here at number 3. Without a doubt, Jeff Brom has been one of the best evaluators of quarterbacks and architects of offense in the country, right? I mean, Death, Taxes, and Louisville is going to put points on the scoreboard in most of their games. He's turning once again to the transfer portal for another quarterback. He's kind of been the healing hands of some broken careers in the past. So talk to me about the new signal caller and Lincoln Kienholz from Ohio State.
Yeah, Lincoln Kienholz coming down from Columbus. I think a little bit of a different mold than the guys that Jeff Brom has brought in so far. You think back to Jack Plummer, Tyler Shuck, Miller Moss, all guys that he bought low and brought in and raised the floor of. Kienholz hasn't gotten really his big opportunity yet, of course, with the guys that he's been sitting behind being extremely good. Will Howard being a national championship quarterback, Julian Sayin being the next in line for the throne there. But this is a guy that's very talented. He's a dual threat guy, which is not something that Jeff Brom has necessarily had the benefit of in from his previous portal pickups. So I really like this fit. I think that this is going to add a new dynamic to the offense. You mentioned that the offense has been pretty good, but it did slip just a little bit last year. It was a little bit less consistent with Miller Moss. The turnover bug got him a few times and kept that ceiling a little bit lower for the offense. But yeah, I think this is going to be a situation where they can go bounce right back up. And I really, really like what they have around him.
Yeah, the skill position around him is well stocked. Those cupboards are full. Isaac Brown heads to the transfer portal when that opens, but then he comes back. And without a doubt, I think that is the biggest single addition or retention, I guess, that Louisville could have made. The running game was really, really fun when Isaac Brown was healthy last year. Talk to me about what the rest of the offense looks like with Brown and some of these new weapons.
Yeah, you look at the receiving core. It's kind of it's rebuilt through the portal. Then you're looking at potentially 3 portal starters in Tracian Hurry, LaWayne McCoy, and Trey Richardson being the big pickup from Vanderbilt. He was, I feel like kind of quietly had 810 yards last year for the Commodores. He was kind of overshadowed by Eli Stowers in that offense and Diego Pavia, of course, but Trey Richardson, really, really nice pickup in the portal. Then you've got a lot of moving pieces on the offensive line. I think that's the biggest concern for me is how do these guys find a way to gel? We're always going to ask that when the offensive line is primarily built out of the portal. How are these guys going to gel, and how quickly is it all going to come together? That's going to really determine the ceiling of the offense.
On the defensive side, some shakeup in the coaching staff. You've got now co-coordinators as Ron English takes a step away from coaching for a year. Defense is talented, but that's much easier said than done. Filling a guy who's kind of been a mainstay, and you've been able to count on him with co-DCs. I think that's tricky at best.
Yeah, and the backfilling from there, from promoting within, from position coaches to fill that co-DC role, and then how do you balance that with your position groups, just opens up a lot of potential issues, I'll say. But you look at the guys that they do have, that they have the luxury of playing with. You have AJ Green up front as an interesting a young guy off the edge that is really going to be talented. Clay Lubin coming in from Florida, from Coastal Carolina last year, was a guy that was the big addition, and he certainly lived up to the bill with 8 sacks. He's back to come off the edge again. So there's a lot of pieces, certainly, especially up front, that they can build off of. So I think it's still going to be a stout defense, a lot to look forward to. And if they can build from the front back, they should have a lot of success this year.
When you look at the schedule, Louisville is always good for an upset a year, right? We know this. They've picked on Clemson in years past. They picked on Miami. It feels like if there is a team that is slated to be number 1 in the conference and Louisville's on their schedule, watch out. Don't clutch your pearls too tightly, because it might just be a fact of nature. It's happening. So talk to me about the schedule. They open against Ole Miss in Nashville, which is sneakily one of the best games. I mean, really one of the only good games, I think, in week 1. The week 1 slate stinks, spoiler alert. But that game will be very much a proven commodity in Louisville football, although there are a bunch of new pieces, versus the new era of Ole Miss, right? So, starting with that game, like, it feels like Ole Miss should already be on upset alert, right?
I'm really interested to see that game. I think it could be a little bit more like, I think Tennessee and Syracuse played an SEC ACC game at a neutral site week 1 last year. That's kind of what it feels a little bit more like to me, where it could be a fun shootout for a little bit. Ole Miss maybe pulls away late, finds a way to win that game by 17 or so, but certainly going to be the toughest out of conference game that Ole Miss has faced in quite some time. So very interested to see how they handle that. The bigger game that I'm interested in is 2 weeks after that, because potential game of the year in the ACC might not involve Miami. And I think it could be SMU at Louisville, week 3, Saturday, September 19th, where I think that game could go a long way towards deciding, hey, who is going to be that number 2 team that probably faces off against Miami and Charlotte. I'm right there with you. SMU having to go on the road. They gave us a really fun game 2 years ago in Louisville
Very, very close. I think it was a low scoring game, if I'm not mistaken, but a very, very fun back and forth game. I can't wait for that. Kicks off ACC play for both teams, I do believe. After that, some interesting road trips at NC State. They go to Syracuse, which is never a comfy place to play, at Georgia Tech, at North Carolina, and then at Kentucky to wrap up the rest of the season. No Miami on the schedule this year. So that's a nice perk, maybe more so for Miami than it is Louisville.
No Clemson either.
No Clemson, yeah. So, you talk about the other teams at the very, very top of the conference. You beat SMU, and I think you've shown you should for sure be able to beat everybody else on your schedule, yeah?
I think so. Show me the toughest road game on their schedule. Is it NC State with everything that they've got to replace? Is it going up to the Dome in Syracuse just with all the craziness up there? Is it maybe Georgia Tech at the end of the year if they figured things out with Alberto Mendoza? That's probably the answer, but the road slate could be a lot tougher. It is not the toughest one in the conference by far. And then the teams that you have coming to Louisville, if you can just take care of business and avoid the WTF loss, right? That's really what's held them back the last couple of years. Losing to Stanford last season after you beat Miami, or was that 2 seasons? That might have been 2 seasons ago when they lost to Stanford, but losing to Cal, it was Cal at home.
Yeah.
And then following that up by losing to a Clemson team that had pretty much given up at that point in the year. Losing those in 2025, I think it was 2024 when they lost that game to Stanford, on the road. So just avoid the WTF moment and take care of business against that schedule you're gifted. And you're probably going to be finding yourself either right there. If you beat SMU, you're going to be in Charlotte, I think. If you lose to SMU, you're still going to be right there towards the end of the year.
Gosh, thinking about that, like Louisville is
some reason
maybe a more composed NC State, like the better version of NC State, where it feels like they should go 11-1. They should go 10-2. They should reserve a spot in the ACC championship game, and then you're, like you mentioned, just out of nowhere, like, what? You lost to who? In what? That's what I'm afraid of as well. But man, if they can conquer that, if they can get up for SMU, which they always seem to do for those big games, and then just hang on, right? Just take care of business. Very, very possible for Louisville to find its way back to a conference or into a conference championship. Well, a lot of talk about Louisville and SMU and how important that game is. Let's talk about the SMU Mustangs. Rhett Lashley's group, boy, the job that he's done in Dallas, taking SMU from a formerly great program that had just, been wiped out by the death penalty and kind of wandering in the wilderness of, smaller conferences for the last several years. They start to build a name for themselves in the American. They're fully here in the ACC. And Rhett Lashley has not only done a great job building at SMU, but warded off other offers. Told Arkansas, which he's an Arkansas native, hey, no thanks. I like what I'm doing at SMU. That's got to get the folks on the hilltop fired up. They're also going to be fired up by the fact that they're ranked number 2 in our ACC power ranking. So obviously led by Kevin Jennings, a Heisman hopeful, Heisman favorite, maybe even depending on who you talk to. He just got the Performance Center, the Health and Fitness Center named after him, which is a huge honor. Talk to me about SMU and what you expect from the Mustangs this year.
Yeah, love that we're getting the Kevin Jennings swan song. Love that he's stayed at SMU. You talk about Rhett Lashley having suitors around the country. I'm sure Kevin Jennings has had some backdoor suitors in his time at SMU, because think about the number of proud programs that would love to have him at play quarterback. Love that he stuck it out there. And I love that they really boosted the skill talent around him this fall. So it starts with Kendrick Raphael, the Cal running back last year. Much needed consistent ground presence that he's going to bring. It was really if you can't beat him, take him in the portal situation after Raphael entered when his coach was fired. But Kendrick Raphael almost single-handedly just killed SMU's ACC title chances last year in that last game. So they add him to the fold, get him on their side now. I think that's a huge. They added Yannick Smith from Eastern Carolina. They added Theo Melanostrom from Texas A&M at the tight end position. That tight end position has been really key at kind of unlocking the offense at SMU the last few years. So if they have if Melon Ostrom can kind of build on what he's done at A&M and be a more reliable receiving threat, that's going to be a huge, huge addition for them. So love what they did to support their senior quarterback. And I think if you're looking outside, if the list of quarterbacks that you'd rather have in this conference than Kevin Jennings running the show, pretty short. Maybe Darian Menza. I don't know that I can go more than that. They're going to have a decided advantage at that position pretty much anytime they go out.
I'd love to see Jalen Hale be healthy as well. Former 5-star wide receiver out of Longview in East Texas, went to Alabama, has never once been healthy. I mean, hurt every season. I think he's been in college so far. Transfers home, comes to SMU. Hopefully he's healthy because, man, that kid was a freak in high school. Would love to see him. The preview that I've got sitting in front of me has him in the slot. I don't think he's actually a slot receiver, but I would love to see him on the field regardless. So flip it over to the defense. They also had to go to the portal there, and that's what Lashley's done so well. Building the defensive line specifically. That the first year that they were really a force, they took like half their defensive line depth from Miami. Obviously, a lot of inroads out on the East Coast from his days at Miami, but he's also just built this elite reputation, I think, as a recruiter. What does the defense look like after all of these new additions?
Yeah, it's a lot of new guys that they're going to start in the coming from the portal. Depending on who you consult for the depth chart or look at, they could have as many as 6 starters coming from the portal this year. Like what they have up front, they added Alcon Crowder on the inside from Kansas State, big space eater, to fill up some of those running lanes that they gave up last year. Marquez White that they added from UMass of all places. He had 5 sacks a season ago. Very interesting pickup to see how that can maybe spin up to a higher competition, and also just having some more help around him instead of just being the only guy on the defense for the offensive line to key on. And then you get your typical Rhett Lashley former blue chip recruits coming from other Power 5 programs to kind of get another chance, right? Your Javon Thomas from Texas A&M that just was kind of not I don't think for lack of pure talent, but was just kind of passed up on the depth chart at Texas A&M. I think there's still a lot of raw talent there. Marcellus Barnes, who they got from Syracuse, I believe, is another interesting piece back there. He actually, I think, transferred in last year, if I'm remembering correctly. So he's been in the program for a little bit, but you get my point. Lots of guys that Rhett Lashley and this defensive staff have been able to kind of mold after they had their chance at another program, maybe didn't do the most, got passed up on the depth chart. A lot of guys coming home to Dallas as well, the Dallas area, to play for SMU. I think it's an awesome recruiting strategy, and they've definitely made the most of it. So lots of moving pieces, but again, this is not something that SMU is a stranger to, and they've shown that they can handle it.
Well, SMU, their schedule is fascinating because they don't have Miami. They don't have Clemson. They don't even have Georgia Tech on their schedule this year. They've got a tough start at Florida State, at Louisville in 2 of their first 4 games. And then the finish of the year, I think, will be challenging in that it's kind of wonky. Virginia Tech I believe on a Friday night to start November, and then at Notre Dame.
That one is on a Friday.
Yeah,
yes.
at Notre Dame and at Stanford to finish out the season. I say that stretch is tricky, not only because Virginia Tech I think should be talented, Wake Forest should be interesting, and then obviously Notre Dame is a national title contender, but also because they struggled going out west to end their season against a Cal team that blew up their championship hopes. So yeah, I think there's intrigue on both ends of this spectrum. What are you projecting for the Mustangs this year?
I think at least 9 wins. I think it's going to really swing on if they can get over that is those 2 early road games, because you have a little bit of a disadvantage with Florida State is going to play on week 0. You don't get to play on week 0. So Florida State has a week to watch film against another team and work out some kinks. Still think you're the better team. It's going to be tough to go into Doak Campbell, but Other teams have been able to do it the last few years, and I think that this SMU team can as well. Then you get that Louisville game. We've said it a million times now between talking about SMU and Louisville that is potentially the game of the year for both of these teams, setting the tone so early. If you get by both of those games, I really don't see another team that should beat them until they get to that Notre Dame game at the end of the year. When you consider where they're playing, going to Syracuse on Halloween is going to be very tricky and could get very, very weird. But the other road games, this is a program that's taken care of business on the road. They're at home from September 26th until that game on Halloween. So that's a nice middle of the season. You're just staying comfortable, sleeping in your own bed quite a bit. Lots of things coming up. Just really, really nice for SMU this year to make a run to Charlotte and hopefully give Miami a run for it. They, of course, beat the Hurricanes last year. So if they can, rematch with Miami, that could be a really awesome ACC championship game.
I would love to see SMU make it back to the championship game. I think they're probably my pick alongside Miami, and it's easy to make that because they don't play each other, right? The schedule is just truly luck of the draw. But SMU has to mind their P's and Q's if they're going to get that done. They're going to have to take care of some lesser opponents on the road, which they didn't do, quite frankly, last year. I mean, even you think back to that Wake Forest game, they shouldn't have gotten out of that alive. So a lot to clean up, but it's a very fun team in Dallas this fall. I'm excited for SMU. And that brings us to the number one team in the ACC. No surprise here. The Jimmies and Joes had them, I think, almost unanimous with most other previews, the Miami Hurricanes. And Trey, Miami fell to Indiana in the national championship last year, but it was truly, I think, a culmination of a lot of things finally coming together for Mario Cristobal. The ability to not shoot themselves in the foot, to play physical football, to be faster and more buttoned up than their opponents. They had a tough road to get through the playoff. I mean, to go through Texas A&M on the road, to get through Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl when I think just about everybody was picking Ohio State to win that game, right? Then to get through Ole Miss, right, was their semifinal opponent. They had to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. They were able to do it ultimately. So this year they have a lot coming back. Obviously, a new quarterback in Darian Menza. We'll talk about him in a second. You get your starting running back. You get your best wide receiver from last year back. Your offensive line is stout again. The defense has some really old guys on that unit for as much as they lost. There's no doubt that this team looks like a championship contender. So when it kind of feels like head and shoulders, they're more talented, faster, more physical than just about everybody else in the conference. Like, where do you even begin to start asking questions and testing the theory of, is Miami an ACC champion for the first time ever, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can start with the quarterback position. I think Darian Menza is obviously one of the most talented options that was available in the portal last year. I think Darian Menza has
was he available?
In him.
Was he available in the portal?
Details. So that was settled out of court, Mitch. We don't have to relitigate that. But Darian Menza, you think about his game at Duke. We saw him have a lot of really, really good. And even going back to his time at Tulane before Duke, we've seen a lot of really good out of Darian Menza. We've seen a lot of good with his legs. I think his ability to throw the football developed quite a bit last season at Duke. That was definitely a big question going into the season, but he's certainly proved the doubters wrong there. Still has a little bit of hero ball in him, I think. And I don't know how much of that is playing alongside the guys that he was playing with at Duke. No disrespect to the ACC champion Blue Devils, but I think he's going to have more talented pieces, that goes without saying, next to him, where he maybe doesn't have to play as much hero ball and get into the turnover trouble that he did. But he's capable of some stinkers, and Carson Beck certainly was as well when you look at the guy that he's replacing. But capable of some stinkers, maybe not as many big time skins on the wall. It's weird to say that for a conference champion QB, but not playing, in the playoff like Carson Beck was, not playing in in some of the big time games like Cam Ward was, or having the pedigree and the obvious jump off the film traits that Cam Ward did. So that's where my questions start. I think Darian Menza is going to answer a lot of those questions in the affirmative, right? I'm not like sounding alarm bells over Darian Menza. I think he was a really great portal pickup, regardless of how they were able to get him. But I think he's really going to be helped more so by the talent that's around him. You mentioned Malachi Tony coming back. You mentioned Mark Fletcher spurning the NFL and coming back for his senior season. He's bringing his number one receiver from Duke with him, and Cooper Barkati. Lots and lots of really solid pieces, and then some continuity on the offensive line too, right? Like you are potentially going to have a true freshman tackle starting in Jackson Cantwell, but
should be.
Other than
should
that,
be.
there's a sorry
should be starting, and a lot of praise for him out of fall camp so far.
Yeah, so I mean, if you want a true freshman tackle starting, you want it to be a 5-star number 2 in the country type body. That's I'm seeing 6'6", 330 pounds, 6'8", 330 pounds. So like, doesn't look like a freshman, but still, maybe an adjustment there to college football. That the questions are really nitpicking though when you look at the offensive side of the ball. I've talked for a few minutes now and just of really nitpicking potential issues. I think the offense is going to be more than fine.
Yeah. Well, and they get their coordinators back too. Shannon Dawson comes back on the offensive side, Corey Heatherman back on the defensive side. It feels like one of the first things to go when you build a championship team. Even if you have young talent, you can pay them. The coordinators are still looking for opportunities elsewhere, right? Like it's hard to turn down, in this case, another head coaching job. And I'm sure that both of those guys had some of those questions and some of those phone calls over the offseason. Obviously, they come back to Coral Gables for another year. I wonder if it's unfinished business on that campus. That's certainly the message that I would be preaching if I was Mario Cristobal. Talk to me about, well, what else do you want to talk about with Miami here?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about questions for Miami, right? And I think that's how we need to frame this discussion, because far and away the best team on paper in the ACC.
Yeah, look the part.
What could keep them from finally winning the ACC? Maybe they don't get as much production out of the pass rush. I think that's a valid concern, right? You're replacing Ruben Bain, Akeem Mesidor, guys that are going to be terrors in the NFL this year. They did pick up Damon Wilson II from Missouri, and that's a massive, massive step in the right direction towards replacing that production, right? And then you're going to need a guy like Marquise Lightfoot to take another step forward. He had some nice spurts last year as kind of a rotational guy, right? I think even in the Cotton Bowl, he was getting in there and making some plays. So, I think that's maybe the big question. I think your secondary getting another year of experience, right? Bryce Fitzgerald coming back for his second year, having a lot of pieces in the secondary to maybe cover for a lack of as elite of a pass rush this year, if it comes to that, could certainly help you. But that's really the biggest question of my team. Can they replace that pass rush? Can it be just 80 to 90% as lethal as it was last year? If it can, you're still going to be runaway favorite to win this conference.
Well, and runaway favorite, not only because of the talent, but the schedule is workable as well. I mentioned no SMU, no Louisville. Walk us through that. They've got a road game at Clemson in week 5. They do host Florida State and Pitt. They obviously go to Notre Dame late in the season, which I think will probably be more of a test of Notre Dame. And we'll talk about their schedule in just a second, but all eyes will be on South Bend for that one. And then they'll close at home for 3 in a row. Unlike last year where they had to go on the road to finish up the year, this year they're at home, Duke, Virginia Tech, Boston College. I mean, if you're a Miami fan, I'm probably booking a hotel for the ACC championship game. I know it hasn't happened yet. I know there's a reason why it hasn't happened yet. But like this year of all years, with the talent and the schedule, like why not this year, man?
Yeah, I mean, there's not even a Louisville or SMU on the schedule, right? That could jump up and get them. So, I mean, it really is. They open at Stanford. That's a weird trip across the country on a Friday night. But, it's not with a game before it or something like that, or a trap situation. It's what you've been looking forward to all year. So Stanford does have a week 0 game. That's probably not going to matter.
Yeah, they'll lose that.
Yeah. But really, you're looking for opportunities for a Mario Cristobal special to happen. And that's, just not being prepared, something wonky happening. It usually happens at home when it has happened.
It's
so
true.
Maybe Florida State rallies the troops, or Pitt finds a way to make things weird. Virginia Tech at the end of the season. That's really, you're scraping the bottom of the barrel there, though. I think maybe that Virginia Tech game at the end of the year, especially if Miami finds a way to beat Notre Dame, they're kind of coasting into the playoff, into the ACC championship. But again, we're splitting hairs here. We're really trying to scrape the bottom of the barrel to find a challenge, and I don't see it. Like if Miami is not in Charlotte, something has gone terribly wrong.
I'll say if they do drop one of those games, it's to Pitt. I think the bye is
on
after
the Pitt bandwagon.
Yeah, it's after the Clemson game, then they get a bye, then they host Florida State. Probably a little letdown after a rivalry game like that. Certainly no look ahead factor with North Carolina the next week, but Notre Dame coming down the pipe. I'm sure at that point there's a lot of storylines about, well, this is Miami's conference, and go back to the national championship, and like I said, unfinished business. I could see Pitt being that what on earth, why this week special, right? That the Canes cook up. But I think Miami walks into the ACC championship game otherwise relatively unscathed. We'll see what happens in the Notre Dame game. I'm excited about that one, but should be the Hurricanes and everybody else basically in this conference. So that's the ACC done and dusted. Of course, we've got Notre Dame. We wanted to throw them in here because they are interwoven in football, certainly with the ACC. And as we mentioned off the top, this game against Miami could determine everything for Notre Dame, quite honestly. And Trey, I think, honestly, I'd like to start with the schedule for Notre Dame because I think the schedule is one of the biggest talking points, one of the biggest storylines. There's nobody on this schedule. It's Miami and SMU, and that's really it. I guess they have at BYU. At BYU.
Yeah, they go to BYU.
Yes, will be a challenging game. But other than that, man, I mean, Notre Dame should be able to name the final score in a lot of these games.
Yeah, you're looking for challenges, and the fact that their two toughest games, I think, well, two of the three toughest games are at home. An 11-1 Notre Dame that lost to NIU got into the playoff just 2 years ago. So if you want to talk about losing on the road to BYU or splitting Miami and SMU, something along those lines, like there's really no excuse for Notre Dame to not be at least 11-1 with this schedule. We can run through it if you want. It's Wisconsin at Lambeau to open up on Sunday night of opening week. Then it's Rice, Michigan State, at Purdue, at North Carolina, Stanford at BYU, Navy in Foxborough, that Miami game, Boston College, SMU at Syracuse. So if you're keeping track at home, the true road games are BYU, Purdue, North Carolina, Syracuse, end of list.
Yeah.
It's and this was, I think this was their year to go out to USC. Right before USC canceled that game. I can't remember where that was.
I believe, they played last year in South Bend. So
that would have been a tough situation going out to LA, but hey, they did not cancel that game. Like that was not them. So I think this is about as cakewalk as you could possibly get, and you don't even have the two tough ones to start the season like you did last year with Miami and A&M.
Offensively, they're replacing Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. Aeneas Williams is the guy that they're tabbing to pick up the slack there. Kendron Young is another talented back. I think we can all agree that the running production is going to take somewhat of a step back. But the question becomes, does that hurt them on the schedule when the schedule is as soft as it is? And I think most people are expecting CJ Carr to take the next step behind an offensive line, rather, that returns a lot of veterans, is healthy again, and truly looks like one of the better units in the country.
One, I don't know how much. I know the rushing production will go down from the running backs because it's two like literal NFL first rounders. I think I can't remember where Price was drafted, but I think it was the first round.
Yeah, I think in the first round.
Yeah, so like obviously that's a big change, but they're going to be running against air half the time. So I don't know how much like the whole second half is going to be running the football. They might still get close to that production just on who they're playing alone. But I'm really excited about CJ Carr. And you mentioned the offensive line, a lot of continuity there. That's a huge bonus. I think CJ Carr might have a higher ceiling from his receiver core this year. I think that's going to be something really interesting to watch. Jordan Faison obviously back. They pick up Quincy Porter and Mylan Graham from Ohio State, kind of rating the depth of the Buckeyes that just didn't want to wait their turn anymore. So lots of talent in that receiver room. I think I'm really excited to see. And a second-year jump that we're expecting from CJ Carr. He was a little bit inconsistent at times last year, really found his stride as the schedule eased up down the stretch, and he's going to have a lot of runway this year to work out the timing with those new receivers, to stand in the pocket behind that offensive line. He's going to put up some monster numbers. I
think on the defense, I think the pass rush should be terrifying once again. Bryce Young, Bobakar Traore are the edge rushers. Like that's a quarterback's worst nightmare. I like the linebackers. And then in the secondary, you bring in a guy like DJ McKinney, you bring in Leonard Moore, Christian Gray is back. Like, this kind of looks like an NFL light team that Marcus Freeman will have. And to his credit, like there were a lot of questions, I think, and doubts about Chris Ash last year. Like he did a fine job. Outside of the shootout against Texas A&M, the loss at Miami wasn't necessarily the defense's fault. The shootout loss against the Aggies probably was, but other than that, they really settled down. They found ways to get after the passer. I think a lot of us that were not shocked that Notre Dame got left out just pointed to their early season losses and not much more. It wasn't the team. It wasn't the shape that they were in heading into what would have been the postseason. It was that they lost the 2 games that mattered and then steamrolled everybody else. This year, I think they have a chance to really correct that narrative, not only because they don't have any tough opponents early, but because I think they can likely drop 1, maybe 2, given the top 12 agreement that they snuck in the back door. And this year, I think that they would be able to say, as long as they don't lose all 3 of those games, hey, we have a road win against BYU. Hey, we beat SMU. I don't know. I feel like I
think they need to win 11. I think really? If they go 10-2, they're not going to get in. Personally,
if they beat Miami but lose at BYU and maybe they drop a close one to SMU, but they have that win over Miami.
Maybe if they're being compared directly head-to-head to Miami, like they were last year. I think the strength of schedule is going to bite them if they're 10-2. Unless there's like a surprise, unless Wisconsin ends up competing for the Big Ten, right? And then Wisconsin wins 9 games, you have that feather in your cap somehow. That could change things. But as it stands right now, I think they got to go 11-1. I maybe that's just naivety on my part of thinking that they'd get left out 2 years in a row at 10-2. But the committee still has to rank them in the top 12. It isn't like a BCS formula that could be gamed by margin of victory or something like that. There's a lot of voices in that room that might be saying, come on, guys, like we can't rank. We'll put them at 13 just to troll them and then make them opt out of a bowl game again.
Boy, that would be something. I don't see the suits leaving Notre Dame out, especially if they do have a quality win, because that was the problem last year, right? Was that they didn't have any other real win to hang their hat on. It was like, well, the 2 other playoff teams and guys that have NFL quality talent, well, you lost to them. One of them at home. This year, I think it would be different. I think for sure win 11 of those games, but depending on how things shook out, I think a 10-2 Notre Dame team could get in, especially given I think the Big Ten is going to beat themselves up. We know the SEC kind of does some of that, especially if you're like super high on Oklahoma. The math starts to get wonky there on, getting 4 teams into the playoff, I think. And we're obviously down to just 1 G6 team that will get it. The suits made sure of that. So I don't know, certainly something interesting to kind of watch this space over. Last question for you. Notre Dame is a national title contender, not getting into the playoff, not making it to the quarters of the semifinal, a national championship winner. Are you buying or selling that narrative this year?
I'm buying it. I think if I had a preseason vote in the AP poll, I think I'd put Notre Dame number one with everything that they have back with the returning production at quarterback. I think this defense is going to be the best in the country.
Okay.
You mentioned it as NFL light. It was 77% returning production from a unit that was top 10 in scoring last year. There's NFL players left and right on this defense, and there's going to be a lot of single digits and shutouts with the schedule that they're playing this year. So wouldn't shock me at all if they're number one in scoring, partially due to the schedule, but this is a legit defense that is going to make a lot of noise if and when they get to those December and January football games. It's going to travel. They're going to find their way in and out of a lot of sticky situations thanks to that defense. So yeah, I think they can go toe to toe with Ohio State. I think they can go toe to toe with Indiana, with Georgia, with Oregon. I think they are going to be right up there. The only question I might have is, do they have a little bit of Ohio State syndrome from last year where they just didn't really have to find that extra gear? And when they were playing from behind against Indiana and Miami for Ohio State last year, they didn't really know how to find that extra gear. That's really my only question for Notre Dame when it comes to projecting forward to the CFP this year.
I'm with you, man. I'm on the bandwagon. I've been having that conversation over on Twitter. The oxygen's really thin up here. We're in Icarus territory for sure, where I feel like the wings are starting to shake a little bit. They're melting.
Listen, I was the one that called this. Me and Tyler Noe previewed Notre Dame on this channel last year from Always Talking Ball, and we called it a Death Star last year. Yeah. And look, there was some throwing that back in our face after the first two games against Miami and A&M, but they showed why we thought that down the stretch last year, and all those guys are just a year older now. Yeah. We might have just been a year early.
Never wrong, just early. I think that's a great way to wrap this up. The ACC, Notre Dame, the end of our preview season, Trey. Boy, it's been a long journey, but we've done it. Really, really excited. Really, really proud of all the effort that we've put in. The growth on the channel, Substack, the YouTube, our podcast has exploded. Very, very grateful for all of that. And so for you guys at home, the Jimmies and the Joes that made it to the end of the episode, thank you so much. If this is your first episode, first of all, what are you doing? You got a bunch of content to listen to. Cue that up. We'd love to hear from you, and leave us a rating, leave us a like wherever you might find this podcast. Certainly helps us grow the audience and keep things marching forward. For Trey Reeves, I'm Mitch Mason. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. Until next time, so long, everybody.